Every night, exactly at 3 a.m., my daughter-in-law would leave the house. One night, I decided to follow her. She went to a lake, threw a suitcase into the water, and started running. I rowed toward it and opened it with trembling hands. My heart stopped at what I saw inside. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Ember, and at 64 years old, I thought I had seen everything life could throw at me. I was wrong, dead wrong. It started 3 months ago when my daughter-in-law Bellamy moved in with us after she and my son Marcus hit a rough patch financially. Marcus worked long hours at the construction company, often pulling double shifts, so it was just Bellamy and me in the house most evenings. At first I was grateful for the company. After my husband passed 2 years ago, the silence in this old house had become suffocating. Bellamy was always polite, always helpful. She'd make dinner, do the dishes, even help me with my garden. The perfect daughter-in-law, everyone said. But there was something about her that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Maybe it was the way she'd watch me sometimes when she thought I wasn't looking, or how she'd quickly change the subject whenever I asked about her family or her past. The first time I noticed something strange was on a Tuesday night in September. I'd gotten up around 3 a.m. to use the bathroom when I heard the front door close. Soft, careful footsteps on the porch. I looked out my bedroom window and saw Bellamy walking down our driveway, a small suitcase in her hand. I told myself she was probably just taking out trash or getting something from her car. People do odd things sometimes. But when I checked the next morning, her car was still in the same spot, and there was no sign that anything had been moved or thrown away. The second time was exactly a week later. Same time, same quiet footsteps, same suitcase. This time, I watched her walk all the way to the end of our street before she disappeared around the corner. She was gone for about 2 hours. By the third week, I knew this wasn't coincidence. Every Tuesday night at exactly 3 o'clock in the morning, Bellamy would slip out of the house with that suitcase and return before dawn. Marcus never knew, because he was always dead asleep after his long days at work. When I tried to bring it up casually the next morning, asking if she'd heard any noises during the night, she'd just shake her head and change the subject. I started keeping a small notebook, writing down the times she left and returned. 3:05 Tuesday morning, back by 5:30. 3:02 the following Tuesday, back by 5:45. It was like clockwork, and it was driving me insane. The rational part of my mind tried to come up with innocent explanations. Maybe she had a night job she was embarrassed about. Maybe she was sneaking out to buy cigarettes or meet friends. Maybe she couldn't sleep and just liked to walk. But deep in my gut, I knew something wasn't right. Marcus adored Bellamy. They'd been married for 3 years, and I'd never seen my son so happy. She was beautiful, charming, and seemed to genuinely care about him. When they moved in with me, she insisted it was temporary, just until they could save up for their own place. She even offered to help with my medical bills and grocery costs, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something big. The night I decided to follow her was the first Tuesday in October. I'd spent the entire day talking myself out of it, telling myself I was being a paranoid old woman. But when 3 o'clock came and I heard those familiar soft footsteps, something inside me snapped. I threw on my robe and slippers, grabbed my car keys, and quietly slipped out the back door. I followed her at a distance, keeping my headlights off and staying far enough back that she wouldn't notice my old Honda. She walked for about 20 minutes through our quiet neighborhood, then turned onto a dirt road that led to Miller's Lake. It was a spot I knew well. My husband and I used to fish there when Marcus was little. The lake was surrounded by thick woods, isolated and dark, perfect for whatever she was planning to do. I parked behind a cluster of trees and watched as Bellamy made her way to the water's edge. The moon was bright enough that I could see her clearly. She stood there for a moment, looking around nervously, then opened the suitcase. Even from my hiding spot, I could see her hands shaking as she pulled something out of the case. It looked like papers or documents. She held them for a moment, then threw them into the lake. Then came more items, small objects that glinted in the moonlight before disappearing beneath the surface. When the suitcase was empty, she closed it and started walking quickly back toward the road. But instead of her usual calm, measured pace, she was almost running, like she was afraid of something or someone. I waited until she was completely out of sight before making my way to the water's edge. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might wake up the entire county. I found an old fishing boat tied to a small dock, probably left there by someone local who used the lake regularly. The water was cold and murky, but I could see where the objects had sunk. They weren't too deep, maybe 4 or 5 feet down. I took off my shoes and waded in, feeling around with my feet until I found what felt like papers. What I pulled up from that lake changed everything I thought I knew about my daughter-in-law. The documents were waterlogged but still readable. Driver's licenses, social security cards, birth certificates, all with different names, but all with Bellamy's photo. Sarah Martinez, Jennifer Collins, Rebecca Thompson, at least 6 different identities, all with different addresses in different states. But that wasn't the worst part. Mixed in with the fake documents were personal items that made my blood run cold. A wedding ring that definitely wasn't the one Marcus had given her. A locket with a photo of Bellamy with a man I'd never seen before. And a small notebook filled with names, addresses, and what looked like detailed notes about people's daily routines. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped everything back into the lake. I stuffed what I could salvage into my pockets and waded back to shore, my mind racing with questions I was terrified to answer. Who was Bellamy, really? And what had she done to the people whose belongings were now scattered across the bottom of Miller's Lake? As I drove home in the pre-dawn darkness, one thought kept repeating in my mind. My son was sleeping next to a stranger, a dangerous stranger, and I was the only one who knew. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat in my kitchen with the waterlogged documents spread across the table, trying to make sense of what I'd found. The fake IDs were professionally made, not something you could get from some back alley operation. Someone had invested serious money in creating these identities for Bellamy. The notebook was the most disturbing part. Page after page of detailed observations about people. Their work schedules, when they left their houses, who they lived with, what cars they drove. Some entries went back months. It read like a stalker's diary. One entry made my stomach turn. Mrs. Patterson, 72, lives alone at 421 Maple Street. Walks her dog every morning at 7:15. House key hidden under the flower pot. Pension check arrives first Wednesday of each month. Mrs. Patterson lived 3 blocks from us. I'd known her for 15 years. Another entry. Tom and Lisa Rodriguez, both work at the bank. Leave house together at 8:30 sharp. Teenage daughter stays home sick frequently. No security system. The Rodriguezes were members of our church. Lisa had asked me for my pot roast recipe just last month. There were at least 20 similar entries, all detailing the personal habits and vulnerabilities of people in our community, people I knew, people I cared about, and somehow, Bellamy had been watching them, studying them, preparing for something. When Bellamy came down for breakfast that morning, I was waiting with coffee and toast, acting like nothing had happened. But watching her pour cream into her coffee, I noticed things I'd missed before. The way she always positioned herself where she could see both the front door and the back door. How she never fully relaxed, even in casual conversation. The fact that she never talked about her childhood or her family. "You look tired, Ember," she said, her voice filled with what sounded like genuine concern. "Everything all right?" I forced a smile. Just one of those nights. You know how it is at my age. She nodded sympathetically and patted my hand, the same hand that had been throwing evidence into a lake just hours before. "Maybe you should see Dr. Morrison about something to help you sleep," she suggested. "I worry about you being up all night." The irony wasn't lost on me. She was worried about me being up all night. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention to Bellamy's behavior. I noticed that she volunteered frequently at the community center, the library, and the senior citizens center. Perfect places to meet people, to learn about their lives, to gain their trust. I also noticed that she always seemed to know things about our neighbors that Marcus and I had never told her. She knew that Mr. Jenkins had recently been widowed. She knew that the Murphy family was having financial troubles. She knew that elderly Mrs. Garrett had fallen and broken her hip. When I asked her how she knew these things, she'd always have a perfectly reasonable explanation. She'd run into someone at the grocery store. She'd overheard a conversation at the post office. She was just naturally observant. But I was starting to see the pattern. Bellamy collected information about people the way some people collected stamps. Methodically, obsessively, and with a purpose I was only beginning to understand. The second Tuesday after my discovery, I pretended to go to bed early but actually stayed awake, watching from my bedroom window. Sure enough, at exactly 3 o'clock, Bellamy slipped out of the house with her suitcase. This time, I was ready. I'd spent the week preparing, buying a small waterproof flashlight and a pair of rubber gloves. I even practiced the route to the lake during the day, so I'd know exactly where to go in the dark. I followed the same routine, parking behind the trees and watching as she went through her ritual of throwing items into the lake. But this time, I paid more attention to what she was disposing of. More documents, but also jewelry, small electronics, and what looked like prescription medication bottles. After she left, I waded back into the cold water. The items I recovered this time made my blood freeze. Among the newer documents was a death certificate for Jennifer Collins, one of the names from the fake IDs I'd found the week before. The cause of death was listed as accidental overdose, but Jennifer Collins's photo was definitely Bellamy. There were also several credit cards in different names, all maxed out, bank statements showing large cash withdrawals and suspicious transfers, and most chilling of all, a small address book filled with elderly people's names, along with notes about their medical conditions, medications, and financial situations. I recognized some of the names. Mrs. Patterson was there, along with Mr. Jenkins, Mrs. Garrett, and at least 6 other senior citizens from our community. Next to each name were notes like, takes heart medication, opportunity for confusion, and no close family, low risk of investigation. The reality hit me like a physical blow. Bellamy wasn't just studying these people for random criminal activity. She was targeting vulnerable elderly people, probably for some kind of elaborate fraud or theft scheme. And I was living with her. My son was married to her. She'd been sleeping under my roof, eating at my table, pretending to care about our family while planning to hurt people I'd known for decades. The next morning, Bellamy seemed different. More alert, more watchful. She kept looking at me strangely, like she was trying to read my thoughts. "Ember, you seem distracted lately," she said over lunch. "Is there anything bothering you?" I met her eyes, fighting to keep my expression neutral. "Just the usual aches and pains of getting older. Nothing that should worry a young woman like you." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You know, if there's ever anything troubling you, anything at all, you can talk to me. We're family now. Family." The word felt like poison in the air between us. That afternoon, while Bellamy was out at one of her volunteer activities, I did something I'd never thought I'd have to do. I searched her room. What I found in the back of her closet, hidden behind winter coats that no one would need in our climate, made me realize that the documents in the lake were just the tip of the iceberg. There were boxes of similar fake IDs, detailed files on dozens of elderly people from multiple states, and financial records showing a pattern of identity theft and fraud going back at least 5 years. But the most terrifying discovery was a small notebook labeled Current Projects. My name was in there, so was Marcus's, along with detailed notes about our daily routines, our financial situation, and my medical conditions. I was looking at evidence that my daughter-in-law was planning to make me and my son her next victims, and from the timeline in her notes, she was planning to make her move very soon. The evidence I found in Bellamy's closet painted a picture so horrifying that I had to sit down on her bed for several minutes just to process it all. This wasn't the work of some amateur con artist. This was the methodical, calculated operation of someone who had been perfecting her craft for years. The files were organized by state and by victim type. Elderly widows seemed to be her specialty, but she'd also targeted single seniors with health problems and older couples with significant savings. Each file contained photographs taken from a distance, copies of utility bills, medical records obtained through unknown means, and detailed psychological profiles. One file made me physically sick. It belonged to a woman named Dorothy Chen from Phoenix, Arizona. The notes described how Bellamy had befriended Dorothy at a senior center, eventually moving in as a caregiver after Dorothy's hip surgery. The file documented a gradual process of isolating Dorothy from her friends and family, convincing her that everyone was trying to take advantage of her except for dear, sweet Bellamy. The final entry in Dorothy's file was a copy of her death certificate. Natural causes, the document stated. But Bellamy's handwritten notes told a different story. They detailed how she'd gradually increased Dorothy's pain medication dosages, mixed incompatible prescriptions, and eventually administered what she called the final dose, when Dorothy started asking too many questions about her missing jewelry and bank withdrawals. Dorothy Chen had died 6 months ago. Bellamy had moved to our town 2 weeks later. I found similar patterns in 4 other files: elderly people who had died of natural causes or accidental overdoses after Bellamy had inserted herself into their lives as a helpful caregiver or concerned friend. Each death had netted her between $10,000 and $50,000 in cash, jewelry, or valuable items. But it wasn't just the murders that terrified me. It was how good she was at it, how she'd managed to convince families, doctors, and even police that these deaths were tragic but natural occurrences. She never stayed in one place long enough to establish a pattern. She always had alibis. She knew exactly how to manipulate prescription medications to cause natural heart attacks or respiratory failures. My hands were shaking as I photographed the most damning evidence with my cell phone. I wasn't technically savvy, but my granddaughter had taught me the basics when she visited last Christmas. I took pictures of the victim files, the fake identification documents, the financial records showing money transfers, and the notebook detailing her surveillance of our community. The most chilling discovery was a detailed timeline for what she called Project Ember. It outlined a 6-month plan to gradually isolate me from Marcus and our neighbors, convince everyone that I was developing dementia, and eventually position herself as my primary caregiver. The plan included specific dates for introducing medication errors and confusion episodes that would support her narrative of my declining mental health. According to her notes, she'd already begun Phase 1 by suggesting to Marcus that I seemed forgetful and confused lately. She'd also started volunteering to help me with my medications, claiming she wanted to make sure I didn't accidentally take the wrong pills or forget doses. I realized with horror that she'd been slowly implementing her plan for weeks. The night I'd caught her going to the lake, she'd probably been disposing of evidence from her previous victims while preparing to focus entirely on making me her next target. But I'd seen too much. I knew too much. And that made me incredibly dangerous to her. When I heard her car pull into the driveway that afternoon, I quickly put everything back exactly where I'd found it and hurried to my own room. I sat in my chair by the window, pretending to read, while my mind raced with the implications of what I'd discovered. "Ember," Bellamy's voice called from downstairs. "I'm home. How are you feeling?" "Fine, dear," I called back, surprised at how normal my voice sounded. "Just reading." She appeared in my doorway a few minutes later, that same sweet smile on her face. But now I could see what I'd missed before, the calculating look in her eyes, the way she scanned my room to see if anything had been disturbed, the false concern in her voice. "You know, I was talking to Dr. Morrison's nurse today at the pharmacy," she said casually. "She mentioned that sometimes seniors need help organizing their medications. I was thinking maybe I could set up one of those pill organizers for you. You know, to make sure you don't accidentally take too much of anything." My blood ran cold. This was exactly what her notes had predicted. She was starting to position herself as the person responsible for my medications. "That's very thoughtful," I managed to say. "But I've been managing my pills just fine for years." "Of course you have," she said quickly. "I just worry about you, that's all. Sometimes people don't realize when they're starting to have memory issues. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It happens to everyone eventually." The way she said it, so gently and with such apparent concern, made me understand how she'd fooled so many people before me. If I hadn't seen the evidence with my own eyes, I might have believed her myself. "I appreciate your concern," I said carefully. But I think I'm still capable of taking care of myself. Something flickered across her face. Just for a second, the mask slipped, and I saw something cold and calculating underneath. Then the sweet smile returned. Of course you are. I didn't mean to suggest otherwise. She paused in the doorway. Oh, and Ember. I noticed you've been having trouble sleeping lately. Maybe we should ask Dr. Morrison about something to help with that. Insomnia can really affect your memory and judgment. After she left, I sat in my chair for a long time, processing what had just happened. She'd basically told me that she was going to start drugging me, and that any resistance would be attributed to memory problems and poor judgment. That evening at dinner, I watched her interact with Marcus. She was so convincing, so loving and concerned. When she suggested that I'd seemed confused lately and maybe needed help with my medications, Marcus actually agreed. Mom, you have been a little forgetful, he said gently. Maybe it would be good to have Bellamy help organize your pills. She's really good at that stuff. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab my son and shake him and tell him that the woman he loved was a serial killer who was planning to murder his mother. But I knew he wouldn't believe me, not without proof. And if I tried to tell him, Bellamy would simply use it as evidence that I was becoming paranoid and delusional. That night, I lay in bed listening to every sound in the house. When 3 o'clock came and I heard those familiar soft footsteps, I knew I had to make a decision. I could continue gathering evidence and hope I could convince someone before she killed me, or I could take more direct action. As I listened to Bellamy's car start up in the driveway, I realized that I wasn't just fighting for my own life anymore. According to her files, she'd already identified several other potential victims in our community. Mrs. Patterson, who lived alone and trusted everyone. Mr. Jenkins, who was still grieving his wife and desperately lonely. Mrs. Garrett, who was recovering from her hip injury and needed help with daily tasks. Bellamy wasn't just planning to kill me. She was planning to use our town as her hunting ground for as long as it remained profitable. I got out of bed and began getting dressed. It was time to follow her to the lake again, but this time, I wasn't going just to gather evidence. This time, I was going to end this. I followed Bellamy to the lake that night with a plan forming in my mind. I'd brought my cell phone, which I'd charged fully and set to record video. I'd also brought a small flashlight and the printouts of the photos I'd taken of her victim files. If I could catch her in the act of disposing of evidence and confront her with what I knew, maybe I could get her to confess on camera. But when I arrived at the lake, something was different. Bellamy wasn't alone. Hidden behind the same cluster of trees, I watched in horror as a man emerged from the woods near the water's edge. He was tall, thin, probably in his 40s, and he moved with the same careful, predatory precision that I'd learned to recognize in Bellamy. They spoke in hushed tones that I couldn't make out from my hiding spot, but their body language told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a chance encounter. They knew each other well. The way he took the suitcase from her, the way she relaxed in his presence. They were partners. My blood went cold as I realized the full scope of what I was dealing with. Bellamy wasn't working alone. She was part of a team, probably a well-organized operation that moved from town to town, systematically targeting vulnerable seniors. The man opened the suitcase and began methodically throwing items into the lake, but not before examining each one carefully. Documents, jewelry, what looked like medication bottles. All of it disappeared beneath the dark water. But he kept some items, placing them in a separate bag that he carried. After about 20 minutes, they finished their grim business. But instead of leaving separately, they both got into a dark sedan that had been parked on the far side of the lake, hidden from the main road. I watched the car's taillights disappear into the night, my mind racing with the implications. Bellamy hadn't walked to the lake tonight. She'd driven, but not in her usual car, which meant she'd been lying about more than just her nighttime activities. She probably had multiple vehicles, multiple identities, multiple escape routes planned. I sat in my car for a long time after they left, trying to process what I'd witnessed. This wasn't the work of one disturbed individual. This was organized crime on a level I'd never imagined. And I was just one elderly woman who'd stumbled onto their operation by accident. The smart thing would have been to go straight to the police with everything I'd discovered. But I knew that without more concrete evidence, they'd never believe me. The documentation I'd found could be dismissed as circumstantial. The fake IDs could be explained away, and Bellamy had spent months building her reputation in our community as a helpful, caring person. More importantly, I was terrified that if I went to the police and they didn't arrest her immediately, she'd disappear before anyone could stop her. She'd move on to another town, another set of victims, and continue killing innocent people. No, I needed more evidence. I needed to catch her in an act that couldn't be explained away or denied. Over the next few days, I began implementing my own surveillance operation. I started keeping track of when Bellamy left the house, where she went, and who she spoke to. I followed her to the senior center, where I watched her befriend lonely elderly people with the same practiced charm she'd used on me and Marcus. I saw her sitting with Mrs. Patterson, listening intently as the older woman talked about her late husband and her financial worries. I watched her offer to help Mr. Jenkins with his grocery shopping, insisting it was no trouble at all. I observed her volunteering to drive Mrs. Garrett to her doctor's appointments, claiming she wanted to help during her recovery. Each interaction followed the same pattern. Bellamy would identify someone who was isolated or vulnerable, offer practical help that seemed generous and caring, and gradually insert herself deeper into their lives. She was patient, methodical, and absolutely terrifying in her efficiency. But I also noticed something else. She was watching me too. It started with small things. Questions about where I'd been when she couldn't find me at home. Comments about how I seemed restless lately. Suggestions that my behavior was concerning Marcus. One morning over breakfast, she casually mentioned that she'd seen me driving at odd hours. "I couldn't sleep last night, so I was looking out the window," she said, her tone conversational. "I thought I saw your car leaving around 3 in the morning. I was worried something might be wrong." My heart pounded, but I kept my expression neutral. "I think you must have been mistaken. I was in bed all night." She tilted her head, studying my face. "Really? That's strange. I could have sworn it was your Honda." She paused, then smiled that perfect, practiced smile. "Maybe I was just seeing things. You know how shadows can play tricks on you at night." The message was clear. She knew I'd been following her, and she was warning me to stop. That afternoon, while she was out at one of her volunteer activities, I made a decision that would change everything. I called Marcus at work and asked him to come home early. It was time to tell my son the truth about the woman he'd married. When Marcus arrived, he looked worried. "Mom, what's going on? You sounded upset on the phone." I led him into the living room and closed the doors. Then I showed him everything. The photographs I'd taken of Bellamy's files, the evidence I'd retrieved from the lake, the timeline of her previous victims. Marcus's reaction was exactly what I'd feared. Disbelief, anger, and eventually a kind of protective denial that broke my heart. "Mom, this is insane," he said after I'd shown him everything. "You're talking about my wife like she's some kind of serial killer? Do you hear how crazy that sounds?" "I know how it sounds," I said desperately. "But look at the evidence, Marcus. Look at those files. Those are real people who are dead." He barely glanced at the photos. "These could be anything. Pictures of newspaper articles, internet printouts. You could have found all of this online. Why would I make this up? Because you've never liked Bellamy," he said, his voice rising. "You've been looking for reasons to turn me against her since the day we got married." That hurt more than I could have imagined. Not because it was true, but because it wasn't. I'd wanted to like Bellamy. I'd wanted my son to be happy. "Marcus, please. Just listen to me. Check the police records for these names. Call the authorities in Phoenix about Dorothy Chen. Verify what I'm telling you." But he was already shaking his head. "I'm not going to waste police time chasing down your paranoid fantasies." We argued for another hour, but I could see that I was only making things worse. Every piece of evidence I showed him, every logical argument I made, only convinced him more that I was having some kind of mental breakdown. When Bellamy came home and found us arguing, she immediately switched into concerned daughter-in-law mode. "What's wrong?" she asked, looking between Marcus and me with apparent worry. Marcus ran his hands through his hair, looking exhausted. "Mom thinks you're some kind of criminal. She's been following you around town, taking pictures, making up stories about murder files. The look Bellamy gave me in that moment told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't surprised. She wasn't confused or hurt. She was calculating her next move. "Oh, Ember," she said softly, her voice filled with what sounded like genuine sadness. "I was afraid something like this might happen." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. "I've been noticing signs for weeks. The confusion, the forgetfulness, the paranoid thoughts about neighbors and family members. It's classic early-stage dementia." She turned to Marcus, her eyes filled with fake tears. "I didn't want to worry you, but I think your mother needs professional help." I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. With just a few words, she'd turned my evidence into symptoms of mental illness, my surveillance into paranoid delusions, my desperate attempt to save lives into proof that I was losing my mind. "That's not true," I said, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. Bellamy reached out and took my hand, her touch gentle and caring. "I know this is frightening for you, but we're going to get you the help you need. Dr. Morrison has some excellent specialists he can recommend." I looked at my son, hoping to see some doubt in his eyes, some willingness to consider that I might be telling the truth. But all I saw was sadness and a growing conviction that his mother was losing her mind. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the house settle around me, I realized that I'd made a terrible mistake. I'd shown my hand too early, and now Bellamy had successfully painted me as a mentally unstable old woman whose accusations couldn't be trusted. But I'd also learned something important. She wasn't going to wait much longer to make her move. The confrontation with Marcus had forced her timeline forward. She needed to eliminate me before I could convince anyone else to take my concerns seriously. I was running out of time, and I was completely on my own. The next morning brought the confirmation I'd been dreading. Dr. Morrison's office called to schedule an appointment for a cognitive assessment that Bellamy had arranged. When I tried to cancel it, the receptionist gently explained that my family was concerned about my mental health and thought it would be best if I came in for an evaluation. My family. As if Bellamy had any right to make medical decisions for me. I realized then that she was moving faster than I'd anticipated. The confrontation with Marcus had accelerated her timeline. She needed to establish my mental incompetence quickly before I could find another way to expose her. That afternoon, while Bellamy was at the senior center probably selecting her next victim, I did something I'd never thought I'd have to do. I drove to the library and used their computers to research everything I could find about the names in her files. What I discovered confirmed my worst fears. Dorothy Chen, the woman from Phoenix, had indeed died 6 months ago. The obituary described her as a beloved member of her community who'd been cared for in her final months by a devoted friend named Sarah Martinez, one of Bellamy's aliases. I found similar obituaries for 3 other victims, all elderly, all described as having been helped by caring young women with names that matched Bellamy's fake identities. All had died of natural causes after brief illnesses. But I also found something else. A news article from a small town in Nevada about a woman named Jennifer Collins who'd been questioned in connection with the suspicious death of an elderly man she'd been caring for. The article included a photo, and even though it was grainy, I could tell it was Bellamy. The case had been dropped due to lack of evidence, but it gave me hope. Someone else had suspected her before. Someone else had seen through her act. I printed everything I could and drove straight to the police station. I was done trying to convince Marcus. It was time to let law enforcement handle this. The officer who took my statement was polite but skeptical. Detective Sarah Walsh was probably in her 40s, with graying hair and the tired eyes of someone who'd heard every possible story. She listened patiently as I explained everything, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Mrs. Holloway," she said when I finished, "these are very serious accusations. Do you have any physical evidence of these alleged crimes?" I showed her the photos I'd taken of Bellamy's files, the documents I'd retrieved from the lake, and the printouts from my library research. Detective Walsh examined everything carefully. "I can see why you're concerned," she said finally, "but most of this could be circumstantial. The photos could be fake, the documents could have innocent explanations, and the obituaries don't prove any wrongdoing. What about the fake IDs?" I asked desperately. Those are certainly concerning if they're real. But I'd need to examine the actual documents, not just photographs. I felt my last hope slipping away. So you're not going to investigate? I didn't say that, but I need more than what you've shown me to get a warrant. These allegations are serious enough that if I pursue them without solid evidence, I could destroy an innocent woman's reputation. She was right, and I knew it. But I also knew that by the time she gathered enough evidence to satisfy legal requirements, I'd be dead. Detective Walsh, I said carefully, what if I could get you more evidence? She leaned forward, her expression serious. Mrs. Holloway, I need you to promise me that you won't do anything dangerous. If this woman is really what you think she is, then confronting her, or trying to gather evidence on your own, could put you in serious danger. I promised. But we both knew I was lying. That evening, I made my preparations. I wrote out everything I knew and sealed it in an envelope addressed to Detective Walsh. I hid copies of all my evidence in 3 different locations around the house. I even wrote a letter to my granddaughter, explaining what had happened and why, in case I didn't survive what I was planning to do. Then I waited for Tuesday night. At 2:30 in the morning, I positioned myself by my bedroom window and watched. Sure enough, at exactly 3 o'clock, Bellamy slipped out of the house. But this time, I noticed something different. She paused at the end of our driveway and looked back at the house for a long moment, as if she was checking to make sure she hadn't been seen. She knew I was watching her, and she was letting me know that she knew. I waited 5 minutes after she left, then got dressed and followed my usual route to the lake. But when I arrived, I found something that made my blood freeze. Bellamy was standing beside the water, but she wasn't alone. The same man from before was there, but now I could see his face clearly in the moonlight. He was holding what looked like a large plastic tarp. They weren't disposing of evidence tonight. They were preparing to create some. I watched in horror as they spread the tarp on the ground near the water's edge. Bellamy opened her suitcase, but instead of documents and jewelry, she pulled out surgical gloves, plastic bags, and what looked like medical supplies. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They were setting up a murder scene. And there was only one person in town who'd been asking too many questions, who'd gotten too close to the truth. They were preparing to kill me. I started to back away from my hiding spot, but a branch cracked under my foot. Both figures by the lake froze, then began moving in my direction. I ran. I crashed through the woods, not caring about the noise I was making, only focused on getting back to my car. Behind me, I could hear them following, their footsteps getting closer. I reached my Honda and fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them in the ignition. The engine turned over just as a flashlight beam swept across my rear window. I drove home faster than I'd driven in 20 years, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might kill me before Bellamy got the chance. When I reached the house, I parked in the garage and sat there for several minutes, trying to catch my breath and figure out what to do next. They knew I'd seen them. They knew I was onto their plan, which meant they'd have to move immediately before I could tell anyone what I'd witnessed. I had maybe an hour before Bellamy returned to the house. Maybe less. I called Detective Walsh's number, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a frantic message explaining what I'd seen and begging her to come to the house immediately. Then I called 911 and tried to report an attempted murder, but the dispatcher seemed confused by my story and kept asking me if anyone was actually hurt. No one was taking me seriously. And why would they? I was just a confused old woman making wild accusations against her devoted daughter-in-law. I was completely alone, and Bellamy would be home soon. That's when I remembered something from her files, something I'd read but hadn't fully processed at the time. In her notes about Dorothy Chen, she'd written about how she'd convinced the woman to change her will, leaving everything to her dear friend Sarah, who'd been so helpful during her illness. I grabbed my own will from the filing cabinet in my study. It was simple and straightforward. Everything split equally between Marcus and my granddaughter. But what if Bellamy had somehow gotten access to it? What if she'd already made changes? I found my reading glasses and examined every page carefully. At first, everything looked normal, but then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The signature on the witness page wasn't quite right. The ink was slightly different, and the date had been changed. Someone had forged a new will, leaving everything to Marcus and his wife jointly. If I died, Bellamy would inherit half of everything I owned, including the house and my life insurance policy worth $200,000. She'd been planning this for months, systematically positioning herself to benefit from my death while building the narrative that I was mentally unstable and prone to accidents. I heard a car door slam outside. She was back. I quickly put the will away and tried to look like I'd been sleeping. But as I lay in my bed listening to her soft footsteps in the hallway, I knew that this was probably going to be my last night alive, unless I could find a way to turn the tables on her first. I lay perfectly still as I heard Bellamy's footsteps pause outside my bedroom door. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure she could hear it through the walls. After what felt like an eternity, she moved on to her own room, but I knew this was just the calm before the storm. I waited until I heard her shower running, then quietly got up and implemented the plan I'd been forming during those terrifying minutes of lying in the dark. If I was going to die tonight, I was going to make sure Bellamy went down with me. First, I retrieved the small digital recorder I'd bought years ago for recording family stories. I placed it in my robe pocket and turned it on. Then I went to the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea, adding an extra tea bag to make it stronger. I had a feeling I was going to need the caffeine. 20 minutes later, Bellamy appeared in the kitchen doorway. She'd changed into dark clothes and her hair was pulled back. She looked different somehow, harder, more focused. The mask of the caring daughter-in-law was completely gone. "Ember," she said, her voice no longer carrying that false sweetness I'd grown to hate. "We need to talk." "About what, dear?" I kept my voice steady, grandmotherly. I wanted her to think I was still playing the role of the confused old woman. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table. "About what you saw at the lake tonight." "I'm afraid I don't know what you mean. I've been in bed all evening." She smiled, but it was nothing like the warm expressions she'd used to fool Marcus and everyone else. This smile was cold, predatory. "We both know that's not true. Just like we both know you've been following me for weeks, taking pictures, snooping through my things." She leaned forward. "The question is, what are we going to do about it?" I took a sip of my tea, using the moment to steady my nerves. "I still don't understand what you're talking about." "Fine. Let's play it your way." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small bottle of pills. "These are your heart medications, Ember. Did you know that if you take too many of them, it can cause a very peaceful death? Just like going to sleep." The casual way she said it, as if she were discussing the weather, made my blood run cold. Of course, at your age, with your health conditions, no one would be surprised if you accidentally took a double dose, especially since you've been so confused lately. She unscrewed the cap and shook several pills into her palm. "Poor Marcus will be devastated, but at least he'll have me to comfort him." "What about your partner?" I asked quietly. She paused, the pills halfway to her mouth as if she was going to force-feed them to me. "What partner?" "The man at the lake. The one who's been helping you dispose of evidence from your other victims." For the first time since I'd known her, Bellamy looked genuinely surprised. Then that cold smile returned. "You really have been busy, haven't you?" "Yes, David helps me with the more physical aspects of my work. He's very good at making problems disappear. Like Dorothy Chen? Like the others? They served their purpose. Just like you're going to serve yours." She stood up and moved around the table toward me. "The difference is, I actually like you, Ember. So I'm going to make this quick." That's when I played my trump card. "Before you do anything you'll regret," I said calmly, "you should know that Detective Walsh has been recording this entire conversation." Bellamy froze. "What are you talking about?" I pulled my cell phone out of my robe pocket. The screen showed an active call to Detective Walsh's number. I'd dialed it when I first heard Bellamy coming downstairs, hoping against hope that the detective would answer even at this early hour. "Detective Walsh?" I said into the phone. "Did you hear all of that?" A tinny voice came through the speaker. "Yes, Mrs. Holloway. We heard everything. Officers are already on their way to your location." Bellamy's face went white, then red with rage. She lunged toward me, but I was ready for her. I threw my hot tea directly into her face, causing her to scream and stumble backward. That's when Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway, drawn by the commotion. He took in the scene. His wife with tea dripping from her face and murder in her eyes. His mother backing away with a phone in her hand, pills scattered across the kitchen table. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded. "Your wife," I said, not taking my eyes off Bellamy, "just tried to force-feed me an overdose of heart medication. After confessing to multiple murders, Marcus looked between us, confusion and disbelief warring on his face. "Mom, what are you talking about?" That's when we heard the sirens. Bellamy made one last desperate attempt to maintain her cover. "Marcus, don't listen to her. She's having one of her episodes. She attacked me with hot tea and she's been making these crazy accusations all night." But Detective Walsh's voice came clearly through my phone speaker. "Mr. Holloway, this is Detective Walsh with the county police. We have a recording of your wife confessing to multiple murders and threatening your mother's life. Please step away from her immediately." The sound of police cars pulling into our driveway filled the kitchen. Bellamy's shoulders sagged as she realized it was over. "You have no idea what you've done," she said to me, her voice filled with venom. "David will come looking for you." "This isn't over." "Actually, it is," Detective Walsh said as she entered the kitchen with two uniformed officers behind her. "We picked up your partner an hour ago. He was very eager to cooperate once we showed him the evidence Mrs. Holloway had gathered." As they handcuffed Bellamy and read her rights, I felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion wash over me. It was finally over. Marcus stood in the corner of our kitchen, watching his wife being arrested, his face a mask of shock and betrayal. When the police had gone and it was just the two of us, he finally spoke. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have believed you. I should have listened." I put my arms around my son and held him while he cried. "You couldn't have known. She was very good at what she did." Detective Walsh stayed behind to take my final statement. She explained that David, Bellamy's partner, had provided details about their entire operation. They'd been working together for almost 7 years, moving from town to town, targeting vulnerable seniors. Bellamy would establish herself in the community while David remained in the background, helping dispose of evidence and providing muscle when needed. "How many people did they kill?" I asked. "We're still investigating, but David says at least 12 over the past 5 years. Maybe more." Detective Walsh shook her head. "If you hadn't figured out what was happening, she probably would have continued for years." 3 months later, I testified at Bellamy's trial. She showed no remorse, no emotion, as victim after victim's family members told their stories. The jury took less than 2 hours to convict her on multiple counts of murder. She received life in prison without the possibility of parole. David received 25 years in exchange for his cooperation. Marcus and I had a long road ahead of us, healing from the betrayal and rebuilding our relationship, but we were both alive, and we were together. That was more than I dared hope for during those dark weeks when I thought no one would believe me. Sometimes I still wake up at 3 in the morning, listening for soft footsteps in the hallway. But now when I look out my bedroom window, all I see is our peaceful neighborhood, full of people who are safe because one elderly woman refused to be a victim. The lake where Bellamy disposed of evidence from her crimes has been drained by the police. They recovered dozens of items belonging to her victims, providing closure for families who'd wondered what happened to their missing loved ones. As for me, I've learned that being 64 doesn't mean being helpless. It doesn't mean accepting that people can take advantage of you because you're old or alone or trusting. Sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who smile the sweetest and offer the most help. But sometimes the most effective defenders are the ones nobody expects to fight back. I'm still here, still standing, still protecting my family, and I always will be. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.